in his company surviving and it not.
Thank you, Senator Ruston. Senator Gallacher.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I too rise to make a contribution in this debate, and I will take the challenge from Senator Ruston to make my contribution not so much negative but more positive. The reality is, though, that there was an election in September 2013 and a government was elected. And whilst it's fair to say that they can argue decisions made prior, or no decision made prior, can impact on their ability to govern, 2 years later you can't keep trotting out the same excuse. Our hands are tied by another government. You are the government, there is a transformation package, there is two competing views here. There's the economic rationalist view that just chop it, let it burn, let it die, move on, get the workers into another sector of the economy, just let it all go. But let's just go back and see what we're talking about here. Just take Holden. The history of Holden dates back to 1856, when it started as a saddlery business in South Australia. And today Holden is one of only 7 fully integrated global General Motors operations that designs, builds and sells vehicles for Australia and around the world. So it's a very, very tight, efficient operation. We know that Chifley launched the first mass-produced Australian car in 1948. We know that Holden's has its headquarters in Port Melbourne, Victoria, with the engine manufacturing plant on site and vehicle manufacturing operations in Adelaide, represented by 230 dealerships nationally and employs about 3,500 people. And we know that in 2013, Holden began the production of the VF Commodore, the most advanced car ever built in Australia, incorporating lightweight technologies such as aluminium construction, a raft of cutting-edge driver safety and infotainment systems, and it set a new standard for Australian cars. So we know that that's what's at risk. And we also know, those that want to listen to the argument, that we are a small country and 200,000 cars sold or manufactured, probably not the economy of scale that the modern global manufacturing motor vehicle sector needs. I've visited Thailand. I know they make 1 million cars in Thailand. But while I talk about Thailand, in Thailand we had the opportunity of meeting business people who put together a trade mission to go to South Australia to talk specifically to the component manufacturers in South Australia about refocusing their attention on the emerging opportunities in both Thailand and Myanmar. They came to South Australia to talk to component manufacturers who should refocus their attention from Holden's, or, as it is today, Ford's or Toyota, to the emerging opportunities in Asia. And what we find, that despite the best endeavours, Senator Xenophon, Senator Madigan, the Labor Party, is that these people are not able to tune their activities to the opportunities that may be around, the opportunities that arise from their great skill and expertise in doing the work that they're currently doing. Now, Senator Ruston was critical of this side of the chamber about free trade agreements. I've been fortunate enough to sit through the Japan-Australia Economic Partnership Agreement inquiry and the CAFTA agreement, Korean-Australia Free Trade Agreement. And hopefully I'll be around long enough to go through the China Free Trade Agreement inquiry. And one of the things that really struck me in the evidence given, not by someone who is opposed to the Free Trade Agreement, by someone who is in favour of the Free Trade Agreement, and they were representing the Australia Chamber of Commerce and Industry, their evidence went along the lines, I think, of 18,000 companies we represent. And I thought, well, that's a really good slice of Australian business. 20% of those companies, 20% of those companies export. But 100% of those companies face the full competitive effects of a free trade agreement. So those people who are in business in Australia, quietly going about their business, who don't export, who just do things in the economy which makes them a quid, keeps people employed, they're reasonably happy, have no idea that the effects of a trade agreement is that their world or their business can be turned upside down, and they're not ready for it. They have no knowledge of it. And, you know, the economic rationalists say that's it. Competition is good. Competition is good. What competition actually means in a lot of sectors is failure of business and reduction of employment and people exiting. And lo and behold, I think that's why you have a transformation scheme. I think all governments, really, of whatever colour or persuasion, have a responsibility to mitigate the effects of competition or decisions which they have made on the economy. Now here you've got 100 years of history, you've got a manufacturing sector which makes motor cars. And the simple fact is, I'm probably the last generation that drives a six-cylinder, rear-wheel drive Ford or Holden. I won't drive anything else. It's quite apparent that younger, more savvy consumers are buying more fuel-efficient cars and smaller cars. So therein you have the problem. Holdens, Fords, large Toyotas are probably not the flavour of the month for the younger buyers. They're not getting the penetration in the market share anymore. And look, I suppose we have to accept that. But we shouldn't accept that the 100 years of expertise, skill that has been generated in the component industry and the other sectors is thrown out with the bathwater as well. We shouldn't accept that. We should allow those people to access funds to retune themselves to other sectors of the economy where they can also take that skill and expertise that they've derived. And let me just give an example. There is a warehouse on the road as we speak. There is a truck leaving Melbourne. It'll get to Neale, and in a 35-kilometre radius of Neale, which is halfway to Adelaide, another truck will meet it, they'll swap over, and the components will go both ways. That will stop. That trucking activity will stop. You know, that warehouse on the road will disappear. Now, you can argue there's plenty of work in transport, they'll just cart something else. But they're good, well-paid jobs. They are good, well-paid jobs. Now, this transformation scheme should be getting to the point, as Senator Xenophon and others have said, where people who have good expertise, good ideas, are assisted to continue to add value in the economy, that they should not just be laid to waste. Independent modelling has said there's up to 200,000 jobs that will be lost between now and 2017. 100,000 jobs in Victoria. 100,000 jobs, almost 25,000 in South Australia. Over 30,000 jobs in New South Wales. Now, if consumers have decided not to buy Fords and Holdens, and you know the company has decided, as we hear, not to produce cars into the future, I would contend egged on and booted around by particularly the Treasurer, Mr Hockey. Senator Rushton would say it's our fault or some other government's fault. But if that is the case, isn't it incumbent on any government to look at 165,000 potential job losses and have a bit of a think about what can be done? Where is it that we can mitigate? Well, we only have to see the work that's been done in very recent times by the Coalition in South Australia and in shipbuilding, where the Prime Minister has been dragged kicking and screaming under the threat of his own job and electoral losses to actually announce grudgingly and very late some improvement in the situation. Well, why doesn't he come to the table here? Why doesn't he get his Minister, McFarlane, to actually look into this and spend the money? Make the attempt to let people transition to a better part of the economy without the job losses, without the closures. It would seem a callous and uncaring government would actually let this happen. That they simply look at the forward estimates, the money saved, and not look at the destruction of lives and families and economies and small business. I mean, these people won't all be in large businesses. They'll be in small businesses, supposedly the heart and soul of the Coalition's constituency. But they are absolutely callous When you look at South Australian small businesses that will be affected by both the valley of death in shipbuilding and in Holden's, it's almost impossible to believe that a government can actually do this. And it's really, I noticed Senator Rushton made the contribution in this debate. I was expecting Senator Edwards or Senator Fawcett or Senator Birmingham even. You know, he could have made a contribution, but they're as quiet as church mouses. The Deputy Whip gets the job to go out and read out the platitudes, blame the other side, it's their fault, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. Well, I've got to remind you again, September 2013 you got elected to govern. It is your job to govern. You govern with the circumstances you're faced, and the circumstances you're faced potentially is 165 or 155,000 jobs to be lost in the states of Victoria, SA and New South Wales. What are you doing about it? People are crying out for access to funds to transition their small businesses into different sectors. As I've said, a group from Thailand visited South Australia looking to get the component manufacturers to redirect into that large manufacturing country where they make 1 million motor cars a year, and even to look at that new frontier that's opening up Myanmar. And if we look at the global motor vehicle supply chain, the most classic example at the moment of an example of that is the airbag story with Takata, I think it's called. So basically a Japanese company makes them or designs them, they're made somewhere and they're in every Toyota and they're not going too well. Apparently there's a number of them that are defective, and there's the biggest recall in the history of the world of automotive manufacturing. Why is it that we exclude ourselves from the opportunity to actually participate in making components and having them in every motor vehicle that's exported around the world? Why are we shutting down our opportunity to continue with almost 60 years of acquired skill and experience? Why are we not endeavouring to retain some of that? I don't know the answer. Perhaps someone on the other side in a later contribution will give us the answer. But I've got to tell you, the answer isn't that it was Labor's fault prior to 2013. That's not the answer. The answer is it has to come from this government. And I suspect the answer is the economic rationalists are totally in control. The forward forecasts of budgetary savings are more important to those in charge of the Liberal Party than the livelihoods of 155,000 people in Victoria, South Australia and New South Wales. I suspect that's the case. Now, if it's not the case, I'm sure someone will take up that challenge in debate. But it really just beggars belief that there is an automotive transformation scheme which component manufacturers are excluded from, given the fact, if you know anything about manufacturing, I think diffs are made out of South Australia. I think the engine's made in Melbourne. Components are made in all different sectors of the geography of Adelaide. They're consolidated together at the manufacturing plant. And I suppose if you go to Thailand, it's probably no different. There are components coming from other countries, there are components coming from other regions. Why can't we join the manufacturing world game? We have the expertise. We know from our information here that, you know, General Motors only have 7 plants in the world that do the whole lot, fully integrated and global. We used to sell Camaros to the Californian Police Force. We used to export many status cars, prestige cars, the high Caprice and those sorts of cars, to the Middle East. And we know that when the dollar was down at actually around about the levels it's at now, Mr Deputy President, that those opportunities were growing. I can remember driving past the embarkment point for cars on the Port Adelaide Wharf, and it was full of Camaros going to the United States. So we know that there have been a lot of trials and tribulations, and we know that the zero tariffs on cars coming in have precipitated this decision. I argue that 5% is probably only if you look around the world, 5% is actually a tariff that's equivalent to zero. But in Australia, we're so economically pure, our economic rationalists go right down to zero. If you want to go and take a carton of milk into the United Arab Emirates and you're not competing against any dairy industry there, they have like a 5% tariff on it. But anyway, that's probably a debate in another area. But Senator Rushton did make the comment about our opposition to free trade agreements. Well, if I return to that, we're not opposed to free trade agreements. I think free trade is a bit of a misnomer in some respects. We're not opposed to competition. I think we are opposed to unfair competition. I think if people are not aware of what's coming, and the evidence from ACCI was quite clear, 20% of their people export. Not many of those people actually know all the rules and regulations of export and take full advantage of the export opportunities. 80% of them don't, but hit the full competitive force. In essence, this is what is happening with the Korean Free Trade Agreement. We're getting cars in for zero, makes it tougher and tougher. Our manufacturing area and our manufacturing of cars has been under the onslaught for a lot of years. But there should be a genuine transformation package. I think it's been put more than enough in this debate that the coalition has turned its back on the industry. They've turned your back on the industry and you're just going to let this wash out. Well, it will wash out. And, you know, if we return to some of the debate in question time today where Senator Abetz said it's probably fine to get a text message or an email saying your job's no longer there. Well, if this comes to pass and 100,000 Victorians, 25,000 South Australians and 30,000 jobs in New South Wales go through lack of action in this sector, then I'd be suggesting that those people may well be sending a text or an email to Senator Abetz and his cabinet colleagues saying that we're going to use our best endeavours to make sure your job goes. The day of the election is the day we'll tell you what we think about your lack of actions in this sector. And I'm sure that Senator Abetz has probably had plenty of texts or emails sort of reflecting on that matter, so it'll be water on a duck's back. But you can't destroy a manufacturing sector. You can't walk away from core promises on building submarines or ships in a small manufacturing economy like South Australia and not pay an electoral price. And it is my view that the Liberal Party, the Liberal Coalition, members of Parliament in South Australia are going to pay an electoral price for this lack of action. And it is also my view that they should turn around and start acting now to put in place remedial action to address the situation that 25,000 South Australians could lose their job. 100,000 Victorians could lose their job. They need to think it through, get on the front foot. They are the government. They can't keep hiding behind, carbon tax or stop the boats. This is in front of them. It's happening to them. There is an opportunity to steer small component manufacturers and small business into more productive sectors of the economy, to give them opportunities to join the global marketing or the global export of components, and they should do it now, Mr Acting Deputy President, as an absolute matter of urgency. They can't hide themselves or hide away from this issue. They can't blame former ministers or former governments. It's their watch, their time to act, and they should act now.
Thank you, Senator Gallacher.